Hi, my name is Margaret Thompson. I'm a retired school teacher, a mother, and, if you asked most people, a quiet woman who always kept the peace. I spent my whole life putting others first, especially my son. I believed that with enough love and patience I could hold our little world together. But then came the day. He asked me for money for the 10th time. And when I said no, he called me something I never thought I'd hear from my own child. That's when I knew. Something had to change. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about waking up and finding strength when you thought you had none left. Before we dive in, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with your country below. I'd love to know wherein the I had just finished paying the electric bill online. A week. Late it when the phone rang. I didn't need to look. I already knew it was Kyle. My stomach clenched into the now familiar knot, the kind that made my hands tremble just enough to fumble the receiver. I steadied myself, exhaled, and answered. "Hi, Mom. I need to see you. It's important," Kyle said, without even saying hello. His voice carried that forced urgency I'd come to recognize over the past 6 months, like someone auditioning for sympathy. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully, trying not to sound alarmed. "I just really need to talk in person," he said, dodging the question like he always did. "Can I come over? Please?" I glanced at the kitchen table where my life now lived, past due notices, medical bills, and my pension statements. My heart ached from exhaustion, not just financial, but emotional. At 67, my teacher's pension barely covered essentials. I hadn't been on vacation in 2 decades. My car groaned every time I turned the ignition. But none of that compared to the quiet grief I carried in my chest every time my son called. "Sure," I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "I'll make some coffee." While I waited, I wandered into the living room and picked up a silver-framed photo from the mantel. Kyle, at 16, grinning in his baseball uniform, back when his cheeks were full, his eyes clear. Before he dropped out of college. Before the job losses, the sketchy friends, the stories that never quite added up. I ran my finger across the glass, tracing his face. "Where did you go?" I whispered. The doorbell rang 30 minutes later. When I opened the door, Kyle stood there. Same disarming smile that used to melt my heart. He looked tired, wiry, older than his 30 years. There was a faint smell of cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. "Hey, Mom." He hugged me briefly, body stiff and restless. "Place looks good. Did you move the furniture around?" "No," I lied. Nothing had changed in years. "Coffee's ready," I said, leading him. Inside, he didn't sit. He paced, eyes scanning the walls, the mantel, the shelves, as if searching for something. Or maybe just stalling. Finally, he dropped onto the couch and leaned forward. "I've got good news. There's this marketing position at a really great company, entry level, but it's a foot in the door." I nodded, allowing myself a sliver of hope. "But I need a little help to get there," he continued quickly. "My apartment's been a mess. Landlord's threatening eviction, and my car's busted again. It's temporary, I swear. I just need $3,000 to tide me over." The hope in my chest withered. 3,000. That was more than his last 3 requests combined. "I don't have it, Kyle," I said quietly. "You've got savings." "I have $200 in savings." I pulled the latest bank statement from my purse and handed it to him. "Look for yourself. After my knee surgery and everything else, there's nothing left." He barely glanced at the paper. "What about a credit card?" "They're maxed out." He stood suddenly, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Mom! How can you be so bad with money?" The word struck like a slap. My ex-husband used to say that too. Even after I worked too, jobs to keep us afloat when he left us. I can give you 200, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, and I found some information on a free counseling center. Counseling? His voice rose sharply. You think I need help? I think something's wrong, I said gently. The mood swings, the lies. This isn't you. There? It is, he snapped, voice boiling over. You were never there for me when I needed you, always working, always too tired. And now you want to act concerned? He lashed out, knocking a framed photo off the end table. It clattered to the floor, glass shattering. I flinched. Kyle, please, calm down. You pathetic old woman, he sneered. You're going to die alone, and you deserve it. He took a step toward me, fists clenched. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my son. Get out, I whispered. He didn't move. Get out of my house, I shouted. He stared at me for a heartbeat too long, breathing hard. Then, in one swift motion, he punched the wall inches from my head. The drywall cracked. Plaster dust rained onto the floor. Without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I slid to the floor, my back against the wall, trembling. My purse sat on the kitchen counter, its flap open. I hadn't left it like that. I crawled over and checked. The emergency credit card was still there. But something nagged at me. I opened the drawer near the sink, the one with batteries, rubber bands, old chargers. The spare key I kept hidden was gone. The boy I had raised was gone. And the man who replaced him might come back. World you're listening from. 3 days after Kyle stormed out, I still jumped at every noise. Every car door slamming outside sent my heart racing. I'd changed the locks, but I still couldn't sleep. I left a light on in every room and flinched whenever floorboards creaked beneath my feet. My son had taken more than a spare key. He had taken my peace. That Friday, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, driving past his apartment building. It was a modest, aging complex, just 6 blocks from my house, close enough for convenience, far enough that I could pretend we lived in separate worlds. But his car wasn't in the lot. A rust-red Honda with a cracked rear-view mirror. I scanned, each row slowly, my pulse quickening with confusion. He always parked in the same spot. I was about to pull away when a woman knocked gently on my window. I startled. She was in her 50s, with short silvering hair and kind, tired eyes. Her name tag read, Linda. Looking for someone? She asked. I rolled the window down. I'm Kyle Thompson's mother, Margaret. Recognition flickered across her face. Margaret. I'm Linda, the property manager. We've spoken on the phone before, I think. Is Kyle home? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Linda hesitated, then stepped a little closer, glancing around before she lowered her voice. He was evicted 3 days ago. Hasn't paid rent in months. I'm sorry. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. There were problems, she continued gently. People coming at all hours. Loud arguments. Neighbors complained about strange smells, fights, shouting. I probably shouldn't say this, but he wasn't well. Not just behind on rent. It was like something had taken over him. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Do you know where he went? She shook her head. He didn't leave a forwarding address. The unit was in bad shape. Cigarette burns on the carpet, holes in the walls, broken blinds. Her voice softened. I'm sorry. It's hard, isn't it? I swallowed, forcing back the tears burning. My throat. Yes, it is. Linda reached out, placing a hand lightly on my arm. I hope he finds his way back. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he could anymore. Later that afternoon, I parked outside the public library where I volunteered twice a week. I considered turning around and going home, but shelving books gave me a sense of order in a life that no longer made sense. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly. I tried to lose myself in the rhythm of the Dewey Decimal System, but kept putting psychology books in the travel section. "Earth to Margaret," a voice called. I looked up. Joyce stood there with her signature red lipstick and floral scarf, holding a clipboard and a worried expression. "That's the third time you've misshelved today. What's going on?" I tried to smile. Failed. "It's Kyle, isn't it?" she asked softly. That simple question cracked something open inside me. Minutes later, I was sitting in the staff break room, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug of peppermint tea. Joyce across from me. "Start from the beginning," she said. So I did. The 10th money request, the shouting, the wall he punched, the missing key, Linda's warnings, the state of the apartment, the strangers, the arguments, the smell. My voice trembled as I spoke, and more than once I had to stop and collect myself. It felt surreal, like I was describing someone else's tragedy. Joyce listened without a single interruption, her face calm and open. When I finally finished, she took my hand in both of hers. "My brother was an addict for 15 years, she said. "Everything you've described, the manipulation, the outbursts, the disappearing money, the mood swings, it's textbook." "Kyle doesn't do drugs," I protested, though the words felt paper thin. "Maybe he doesn't," she said gently. "But addiction can wear many faces: pills, cocaine, gambling, alcohol, even untreated mental illness. But what you're describing, this isn't just a bad patch. It's something deeper." I looked away. "I don't know how to help him anymore." Joyce squeezed my hand. "There's a support group. Families of addicted loved ones. They meet Thursdays at First Presbyterian. Will you come with me tomorrow?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to crawl into bed and never get up again. Another part, the mother in me, needed to understand what had become of my son. "I'll go," I said finally. The following evening, I found myself sitting in a folding chair in a church basement, surrounded by strangers who didn't feel like strangers. There was a worn rug on the floor and a pot of weak coffee on the table. A circle of chairs, a box of tissues in the center. A woman in her 60s with tired eyes introduced herself as Sarah, the facilitator. One by one, people spoke. My daughter pawned my wedding ring to buy pills. My brother stole my car and crashed it during a meth binge. My husband mortgaged our house for gambling debts. My son broke into my house and blamed me for calling the cops. I sat frozen. Their stories mirrored mine with eerie precision. Each tale cracked the walls I'd built around my denial. Finally, Sarah spoke directly to me. "Giving money doesn't help," she said. "It enables. It tells the addict, your choices don't have consequences. Setting boundaries isn't abandonment. It's love with courage." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb the weight of her words. "I offered him counseling," I whispered. "He got angry, called me crazy." "Denial is part of addiction," Sarah said. "Most addicts need to hit rock bottom before they'll accept help. Your job isn't to soften the fall, it's to stop cushioning it." Those words echoed in my mind all night. Stop cushioning it. I'd thought I was helping. That by keeping Kyle afloat, I was saving him. But what if I was drowning with him instead? That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I would no longer give Kyle money. I would no longer pretend I wasn't afraid. I would no longer confuse love with surrender. Saturday mornings had always followed the same rhythm: toast, black coffee, and disappointment. For as long as I could remember, I'd played the same set of lottery numbers every week. It wasn't desperation, it was tradition. A little flicker of hope folded into a dollar bill. I didn't play to get rich. I played to imagine something more than unpaid bills and secondhand clothes. Something possible. The numbers were always The same. Kyle's birthday, my wedding date, the year I started teaching, my mother's age when she died, and the day we bought our first home. A string of moments that defined my life, now reduced to ink on a flimsy ticket. That morning, as I chewed the last bite of toast, the lottery drawing came on. The announcer's voice was upbeat, bordering on smug, as if he knew the odds were laughable. I barely listened as the numbers appeared, too busy balancing my checkbook for the third time that week. And then, my eyes caught the screen. The first number matched. So did the second. And the third. My breath caught. I stood, knocking, my coffee mug over in the process. The spill went unnoticed. I read the numbers again. Then again. All 6 matched. I checked the ticket 3 times, then a 4th. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't thinking. I was just staring. 47 million. The announcer chirped. One winner. Pennsylvania. My knees buckled, and I sank to the kitchen floor, heart hammering against my ribs. 47 million. The world blurred around me. Sound fell away. I felt weightless, detached from time, from logic, from reality. I had won. But the very first name that came to mind wasn't mine. It was Kyle. And suddenly, the joy collapsed under the weight of fear. If Kyle knew, he'd take every penny. Or worse, ruin himself trying. I sat there on the linoleum floor for what felt like hours, ticket clenched in my hand like a lifeline, and a secret. By noon, the shock had given way to calculation. I didn't need anyone knowing. Not neighbors. Not family. And especially not Kyle. I opened my laptop and began researching how to claim winnings anonymously. That's when I found it. Pennsylvania allowed winners to use a legal trust to shield their identity. All I needed was the right law firm. The following Monday, I drove 2 towns over to Henley & Burroughs, a firm specializing in estate law. I didn't want to risk running into anyone I knew. The receptionist barely blinked when I whispered, "I've won the lottery. I need to remain anonymous." An hour later, I sat across from a poised, silver-haired attorney named Patricia Henley, who didn't flinch as I slid the ticket across her desk. "We'll establish a blind trust," she said calmly. "You'll be the primary beneficiary, but the name released to the public will be the Pine Valley Trust. Only you, me, and the trustees will know the truth." "Is that legal?" "Absolutely. Pennsylvania law protects your identity this way. We'll file everything quietly. You'll receive the funds within 60 days. Lump sum or annuity?" "Lump sum." "Smart. That'll be roughly $29.3 million after taxes." I nodded, still trying to process the sheer size of that number. Patricia leaned forward. "Ms. Thompson, you've just become a very wealthy woman. Are you prepared for what comes next?" "I don't want my son to know," I said flatly. She paused. "Would you like to explain?" "No," I said, and that was that. Patricia didn't press. We spent the next 2 hours establishing the trust, selecting secondary trustees, and designing financial safeguards. I left the office with my heart thundering, a folder of confidential documents clutched tightly in my hands, and a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't owe anyone access to my fortune, not even my son. Especially not my son. 2 days later, I returned home from the grocery store to find a police car in front of my house. The front door, hung slightly ajar, splinters around the lock. My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Thompson?" Officer Reynolds approached, an officer I knew from neighborhood meetings. "Looks like a break-in. Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. I wasn't home. Inside, the house looked like a storm had passed through. Couch cushions slashed open, drawers dumped onto the floor. Air vents pried from the walls, even the backs of picture frames removed. "Was anything taken?" he asked, scribbling into a notepad. I scanned the chaos. "No valuables here. I don't keep cash or jewelry." "Any idea who might have done this?" I opened my mouth to answer, but stopped. No, but I couldn't say it. Because saying it meant accepting that Kyle had crossed a line he could never uncross. Before I could respond, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Mom." Kyle's voice, strained and jittery, filled my ear. "I need to see you. Please, it's serious." "Now's not a good time," I said, eyes still sweeping over the wreckage of my living room. "It's life or death," he said. I froze. "What does that mean?" Silence. Then, "I just need money. Just for a few days, I'll pay you back." The desperation in his voice didn't sound like grief or illness. It sounded like withdrawal. "I can't help you," I said firmly. "You always say that," he snapped. "You don't care what happens to me." "I do, but I won't support your destruction." "Then you'll regret this," he muttered, and hung up. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, long after the call ended. Officer Reynolds finished taking photos and promised additional patrols. But I wasn't afraid of strangers anymore. I was afraid of my son. That night, I sat on my bed surrounded by legal folders, bank statements, and passwords. The lottery ticket had already been placed in Patricia's office safe, but its impact had just begun. I had money now, enough to change my life. Enough to change Kyle's too. But I couldn't trust him with it, and I wouldn't sacrifice my peace to save someone who refused to be saved. That night, I locked every door, every window, and then, for the first time in years, I prayed. Not for Kyle to come back, but for the strength to let him go. I never imagined I'd install security cameras in my own home. But after the break-in, after Kyle's call, after the hollow threat that echoed in my ears for days, I had to face what I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer safe, not from strangers, from my own son. Joyce's husband Frank was a retired detective. When I told Joyce everything, the ransacked living room, Kyle's phone call, the missing key, her face paled. "Frank can help," she said without hesitation. "You need more than locks, Margaret. You need to know what's really going on." Next morning, Frank stopped by with coffee, donuts, and the business card of a private security installer. By sunset, 2 small motion-triggered cameras had been placed discreetly in my home. One overlooked the front door and living room. The other faced the hallway leading to my office and bedroom. The app on my phone allowed me to check in any time, from anywhere. The next day, I met a man named Michael Reeves, a former federal investigator, who now specialized in private surveillance and family protection cases. Joyce had vouched for him. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. The escalating requests for money, the eviction, the break-in, the call. I didn't cry this time. My voice was steady, cold even. But inside, my heart was unraveling thread by thread. Michael leaned back in his chair. "You've done the right thing, Margaret. This isn't about being a bad mother. It's about being a smart one." I asked the question I feared most. What if Kyle really meant to hurt me? "We'll find out," he said. For 3 days, nothing happened. Kyle didn't call, didn't text. The cameras remained quiet. I started to second-guess myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was letting fear cloud my judgment. Then, on the 4th morning, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Living room. 7:41 a.m. I opened the app. There he was. Kyle, letting himself in. Through the front door. I froze, coffee cup slipping from my hands and shattering on the kitchen floor. He didn't see the camera as he moved calmly into the house. His body language relaxed, like he owned the place. He headed straight for the hallway, past the family, photos, past the vase he'd bought me for Mother's Day a decade ago. He entered my home office and shut the door behind him. The camera didn't capture what happened inside, but 20 minutes later, he emerged carrying a folder I recognized, my retirement file, then another, my pension and bank statements. He pulled out his phone and began photographing pages. I couldn't breathe. He left the same way he came, locking the door behind him. I called Michael immediately. He arrived within the hour. I didn't even hear him come in, I whispered, hands shaking. He still has the spare key. Michael nodded grimly. This confirms what we feared. He's not just in financial trouble. He's actively hunting for your money. He looked me dead in the eyes. And that means he thinks it exists. I said nothing, because of course, it did. 29.3 million of it, safely hidden. But not safe from the consequences if he ever discovered it. Michael stood. Let me dig into Kyle's background, see what he's gotten himself into. You need the full picture before you decide what to do next. 3 days later, we met at Patricia's office. I didn't want this conversation to happen in my home. Patricia joined us, expression tight. Michael opened a folder and spread out, several photographs across the table. Kyle, meeting with 2 men outside a rundown bar. He looked thinner, agitated. These men, Michael said, tapping the images, are known enforcers for Anthony Castellano, a loan shark operating out of Pittsburgh's South Side. I blinked. Loan shark? Michael nodded. Based on surveillance and financial tracing, Kyle owes upwards of $50,000 in gambling debt, possibly more with interest. He clicked a remote. A short audio clip played from a hidden mic used near one of the meetings, Kyle's voice unmistakable. She's got money. She has to. Something's different lately. New locks, new security stuff, better clothes. I don't know where she's hiding it. But if I can't find it, maybe an accident is easier. Her life insurance should cover what I owe. I didn't realize I'd stood up until Patricia gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I sat down, the blood draining from my face. He said that? Michael nodded. It's not a direct threat, but it's enough to raise serious concern. I can't believe, my voice cracked, but I could believe it. The signs had been there for months. Now they were screaming. Michael continued gently. He's desperate, addicted, cornered, and desperate men do dangerous things. Patricia leaned forward. We need to move your assets into more secure holdings, immediately. I've already placed the winnings under the Pine Valley Trust, I said. Good, she replied. But we can add additional shell protections, move assets offshore, and isolate anything that could be connected to your name. I nodded. My mind was buzzing, but I agreed to everything. Then I turned to Michael. And Kyle? He didn't hesitate. You have 2 options. Cut contact and file for a restraining order, or stage an intervention. Bring in rehab specialists. But either way, you need to stop this spiral before it gets worse. The word intervention landed hard. I had fought so long to protect Kyle, to justify him, to excuse him. But this wasn't about excuses anymore. This was about survival, for both of us. I need time to think, I whispered. Patricia nodded. Of course, but not too much time. You're standing at a cliff edge, Margaret. That night, I sat alone in my house, lights off, curtains drawn. The silence was louder than ever. I took out the photo of Kyle at 16 again. The same one I always reached for when I needed to remember who he used to be. But even that felt different now. That boy was gone. Lost to something deeper, darker. Addiction. Debt. Rage. I couldn't fix him. But maybe, just maybe, I could still save what was left, and that meant making a decision no mother ever wants to make. Tomorrow, I would call the rehab facility. Tomorrow, I would fight back, not with anger, but with resolve. I always imagined an intervention would be some neat, tearful circle, everyone sitting calmly, reading letters, crying, hugging, promising healing. The reality was much messier. After the surveillance footage, after the recording of Kyle talking about an accident, I made the call. A voice answered, calm and measured. David Keller, intervention specialist. I told him everything. Kyle's drug use, the gambling debts, the threats, the burglary, the crowbar through my wall, my growing fear that I no longer recognized my own child. Mrs. Thompson, he said after a long pause, this is no longer just about addiction. This is a crisis intervention. We'll treat it like one. He assembled a team, an addiction counselor, a security consultant, a legal advocate. Michael Reeves agreed to assist with logistics. Patricia would remain involved on the legal end. In 2 days, we had a plan. Kyle would be approached at his current residence, a seedy motel on the edge of the city. He'd be offered 2 choices: immediate transfer to Valley Ridge, a high-end inpatient rehab facility, or the beginning of legal action, including exposure of the evidence we'd collected. I felt sick making the arrangements, but I also felt something else. Clarity. I couldn't keep living in fear. I couldn't keep letting Kyle's spiral pull me under. The night before the intervention, I stayed at Joyce's house. We ate soup and barely spoke. The silence between us was heavy but kind. She didn't offer false hope, only presence. I checked the security cameras one last time before bed. No alerts, all quiet. I told myself, maybe we'll finally turn the page tomorrow. I fell asleep holding that hope like a fragile bird in my hands. The next morning, I woke to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. David Keller. I answered with a heart already racing. There's been a complication, he said. Kyle wasn't at the motel this morning. His roommate said he left last night. Said he was going to settle things with his mother once and for all. I sat up, every nerve in my body going cold. What does that mean? We don't know. But I've alerted the police. A unit is headed to your house now. I scrambled for my phone. Opened the camera app. Motion detected. Front door, 7:06 a.m., Kyle. On my porch. He was pacing, agitated, glancing over his shoulder like someone being chased. He tried the door, found it locked. Then he moved to the window, then to the side yard. He returned to the porch and opened the trunk of his car. My breath caught. He pulled out a crowbar. My fingers fumbled for the panic button, the one linked directly to police dispatch, through the new security system. By the time I hit it, Kyle was trying to pry the door open. Sirens echoed down the street in under 4 minutes. 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop, lights flashing. On my phone screen, I watched the officers draw. Their weapons! Drop the tool! Hands where we can see them! Kyle froze, his face twisted between confusion and rage, but he dropped the crowbar. The officers cuffed him swiftly and opened the trunk further. One officer stepped back immediately and radioed something I couldn't hear. Another removed a black duffel bag. As they opened it, even on the small camera screen, I could see what was inside. A handgun, zip ties, duct tape, loose pills in a baggie, and something in me, something soft and maternal, finally broke. This wasn't addiction. This wasn't just Kyle being lost. This was dangerous. This was criminal, and I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was done. At the police station, they brought me to a small interview room where a detective named Sarah Lombard met me with a firm handshake and tired eyes. Mrs. Thompson, I know this is overwhelming, but I want to walk you through the situation clearly. She laid out the facts like they were paperwork instead of pain. Your son was apprehended at the scene in possession of burglary tools, a loaded firearm, and controlled substances. He also had zip ties and duct tape in the vehicle. Based on the pattern of behavior, including prior surveillance, audio recordings, and his attempt this morning, we believe this may qualify as attempted kidnapping or intimidation with intent to defraud. She slid a document across the table. These are the potential charges. Burglary, 5 to 20 years. Weapons possession, 5 to 10 years. Drug possession with intent to distribute, 3 to 7 years. Attempted kidnapping, 10 to 25 years. I stared at the paper like it was in another language. What do you want to do? She asked softly. I want to see him, I said. They led me to a different room, one with a one-way mirror. I watched as Kyle sat slumped in a metal chair, still in the clothes from this morning, sweat glistening on his forehead. His eyes darted, restlessly. He looked nothing like the boy in my photos. He looked hollowed out, ravenous, terrified. Can I speak to him? Not alone, Detective Lombard said. But yes. They brought him into the room, cuffed, flanked by 2 officers. Looked up and stiffened when he saw me. Mom, he said, voice hoarse. You have to get me out of here. This is all a mistake. I sat down, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I spoke calmly. Mistake? Kyle, you came to my home with a gun, drugs, and duct tape. His eyes flared. It wasn't what it looked like. I was scared. I needed leverage. I wasn't going to hurt you. I almost laughed, but it came out of breath. You had zip ties in your bag. I just wanted to scare you, just enough to get the money. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice, I said gently. You just didn't like the ones that didn't come with handouts. His hands trembled. They're going to kill me, he whispered. The loan sharks. I owe too much. I know, I said. That's why I hired people to help you. He stared at me. What? There's a spot waiting for you at Valley Ridge Recovery Center, one of the best dual diagnosis treatment programs in the state. His face twisted. You think I need rehab? I think if you don't go, you'll die. Or spend the next 20 years in prison. You called the cops on me, he snapped. You set me up. No, I said calmly. You set yourself up. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. He leaned forward. Why now? Because I still love you, I said. And because love doesn't mean letting you destroy both of us. He fell silent. After a long pause, he asked, If I go, will you be there? I'll visit, I said. But you'll have to earn my trust back. One day at a time. He looked away, swallowing hard. And for the first time, he didn't argue. Shout didn't lie, he just nodded. I'll go, he whispered. As the officers led him away, I watched the door close behind him, with a strange mix of grief and relief. The son I knew was gone, but maybe, just maybe, there was still time to bring him back. The courthouse was quiet that morning, almost reverent. Kyle stood beside his public, defender, wrists unshackled for the hearing, but posture still heavy with consequence. He didn't look at me in the gallery. I didn't expect him to. He hadn't said a word since our conversation in the police station, but he hadn't resisted either. The prosecutor laid out the plea agreement. Court-ordered rehabilitation in lieu of immediate sentencing. Charges would remain pending. Suspended, not erased. Valley Ridge Recovery Center had agreed to accept him as a high-risk candidate. I sat with my hands clasped tight in my lap, willing myself to breathe. The judge studied Kyle with the weary gaze of someone who had seen too many promising, Lives corrode under addiction. Mr. Thompson, he said, this is not a second chance. It's a final one. If you leave treatment early or violate the program's rules, I will not hesitate to enforce the full sentencing guidelines. Do you understand? Kyle nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The gavel fell. The arrangement was official. He would be transferred to Valley Ridge within 24 hours. What Kyle didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that I had already paid for his treatment, privately, quietly. The $87,000 program fee had been routed through the Pine Valley Trust, buried beneath an anonymized charitable transaction marked Family Assistance Fund. Not even Patricia's firm staff knew who the recipient was. That's how I wanted it. Kyle would not recover because I rescued him again. He would recover because he chose to. The first few weeks were rough. I received brief updates from his case. Therapist, Dr. Harriet White, medical detox, severe withdrawal, night terrors, refusals to participate. He hadn't asked to see me. He hadn't asked about me at all. That hurt more than I'd expected. But by week 4, the tone shifted. Your son is beginning to stabilize, Dr. White told me during our first formal call. He's attending all sessions. He's been journaling. There's resistance, but there's also honesty. I asked the question I'd been holding in my throat for weeks. Do you think it's real? I think he's starting to see himself, clearly for the first time in a long time, she said gently. What he does with that vision is still up to him. It was week 7 when Dr. White called again. Mrs. Thompson, she said, Kyle has requested a family session. He's ready to begin making amends. I agreed, both terrified and relieved. When I arrived at Valley Ridge, I was struck by how peaceful the grounds were. Rolling fields, walking paths, a community garden maintained by patients. There were no bars on the windows, no guards, only quiet dignity. Dr. White met me in the reception area and led me to a room with 2 armchairs and a table of tissues between them. Kyle was already inside. He looked different, sober, clear-eyed, shaved, thinner but somehow steadier. Not fragile, not angry, just present. Hi, he said quietly. Hi. We sat. Dr. White took a seat nearby, but unobtrusive. I wrote, This, Kyle said, unfolding a paper from his pocket. Part of my Step 9 work. I nodded, heart racing. He read aloud. I manipulated you. I lied to you. I exploited your kindness. I broke into your home. I stole from you. I scared you. And I did it all while telling myself you owed me something. That you were the villain for not helping me faster. That's how deep I was in denial. That's how warped my thinking had become. His voice trembled. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry. I didn't speak right away. I let the words sit between us like smoke slowly clearing from a fire. Thank you, I said finally, my voice steady despite the emotion pulsing in my throat. I've waited a long time to hear that. He nodded, folding the paper again with shaking hands. Then, after a moment of silence, he added, I've been thinking about what comes after this. What do you mean? After rehab. After everything. I want to do something useful. I don't want this, he gestured around the room, to be where my story ends. I smiled faintly. What are you thinking? There's this place, he said. New Dawn Foundation. They help people with addiction. I saw a flyer in the lobby. They offer internships for people in recovery. Peer mentorship stuff. I applied. Figured maybe I can turn some of the damage I did into something good. I froze. He didn't notice. He was too busy talking, too full of earnest hope. New Dawn. My foundation. He had no idea. Because I hadn't told him. Because I wasn't ready. I swallowed. That sounds like a good idea. I don't expect them to pick me, he said. But if they do, I think it could help. To be around people who understand, who are trying to rebuild too. I looked at him. Not just my son, but a man trying to reclaim his life from the wreckage. I think they'd be lucky to have you, I said honestly. And I meant it. Even if they didn't know who he was to me. Even if he didn't know what I had built. Partly for him, and partly for myself. Over the next few months, Kyle's progress continued. Dr. White updated me weekly. He completed his program milestones, began mentoring new residents, facilitated group sessions. He spoke less like a victim and more like a survivor. When he graduated at 6 months, he transferred to a structured halfway house, applied for part-time work at a local print shop, began taking an online class, Intro, to counseling. I sent a congratulatory card through Patricia's office. No name. Just, "You're doing better than you think. Keep going." He never knew it came from me. I didn't need him to know. I needed him to stand on his own. Then came the email from New Dawn's program director. "We've received an application for our recovery internship from a young man named Kyle Thompson. He's a standout candidate. Thought you'd want to be aware." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not as a mother, as a board member, as a founder. My hands hovered over the keyboard, and then I typed, "Proceed with the normal application process. Do not mention his relation to me. If he's the right fit, he'll earn it." And he did. On his first day at New Dawn, I stayed home. Let him arrive on his own terms. Let him step into the building I'd built from broken pieces, his and mine, without ever knowing he was walking into a legacy crafted, quietly, by the woman who had once feared him. Not anymore. That fear had turned to something else now. Not blind trust. Not naive hope. But respect. Earned. Deserved. Gradual. One sober day at a time. I'd always known this day would come. The day Kyle would find out. I just didn't expect it to happen in the break room over lukewarm coffee and a misplaced email. He called me that evening. "Mom," he said, voice measured but shaky. "Can I come over?" I hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but because I already knew. I could hear it in his tone, the tremor beneath the calm. "Yes," I said. "I'll make tea." 20 minutes later, he stood in my kitchen, pacing the floor the way he used to when he was anxious about job interviews or test results. Only now, he was pacing as a man, not a frightened child, still nervous, but grounded. He didn't even sit before launching in. "I overheard something at New Dawn today. One of the directors mentioned reviewing a policy with you, called it Margaret's Clause. Said you wanted trauma-informed intake language added to the intake forms." I stayed quiet. "Then I saw it again," he continued. "On a donor acknowledgement form. Per the founder's direction, Margaret Thompson, Pine Valley Trust." He stopped pacing, turned to me. His face wasn't angry, just hurt. Confused. "You started New Dawn?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes." "And you've been there this whole time, behind the scenes, watching me, guiding things, and not telling me?" "Yes." He let out a breath that felt like it carried 5 years of confusion with it. "Why?" I folded my hands around the warm mug of chamomile. "Because when I won the lottery, you were sick, addicted, desperate, and I didn't trust you. With the money, with the truth, with me." He didn't respond. I continued. "I used the money to protect us. And then, when you were safe, I used it to build something. Something that could help people like you, and mothers like me." He swallowed hard. $47 million, I nodded. He gave a short, humorless laugh. And you never told me. I wanted to, I said quietly. But not when you were still asking for handouts. Not when trust was a weapon. I needed to see who you became without it. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I couldn't read his expression. Then slowly, he walked over and sat across from me. Thank you, he said. I blinked. I'm serious, he said. You were right. If I'd known back then, I would have used it, wasted it, let it destroy me. His voice cracked. You saved my life, not just by funding Valley Ridge, but by staying silent, by letting me earn what I thought I needed to be given. I reached across the table and took his hand. There were no more lies between us, no more manipulation, just truth. Simple, heavy, whole. 5 years passed. Kyle remained. At New Dawn, not as a client or even as an intern, but as a certified counselor and peer support coordinator. He went back to school, earned a degree in social work, became a quiet leader in the recovery community. The boy who once pounded his fists into my wall now spent his days guiding others back from the edge he had once stood on. He never touched the trust. After 5 years of verified sobriety, he became eligible to access the structured fund Patricia and I had created, but he declined. Instead, he asked that the money be used to expand New Dawn's scholarship program for underinsured patients and rural outreach. He never asked me for a single dollar. He just asked if I was proud of him. And I was. So deeply, achingly, proud. At New Dawn's 10th anniversary gala, I watched him take the stage. He wore a navy suit and a silver tie. His posture was straight. His voice, clear. My rock bottom, he told the audience, wasn't when I got arrested. It wasn't detox. It wasn't even Valley Ridge. It was standing in front of my mother with a crowbar and realizing she was afraid of me. A silence fell over the room, and she had every right to be. He looked out at the crowd. But that wasn't the end of my story. That was where it began to change. He didn't mention the lottery, or the trust, or me, because the story wasn't about money. It was about the work, the healing, the grace. A month later, I announced my retirement from New Dawn's board. Victoria, my hand-picked successor, would step in as program director. Kyle would continue his role with expanded responsibilities. As for me, I had plans, not for another project, not for another cause, for myself. Joyce and I were finally going to take that European trip we'd dreamed about. Paris, Florence, the Greek Isles. We'd saved the brochures for years, tucked away in a drawer like fantasies too bold to speak aloud. Now we were booking flights. And I was writing a memoir, When Patience Runs Out. That was the title. Not because I had run out of love, but because I had run out of space for enabling, for fear, for shrinking myself to fit someone else's chaos. And from that moment, the moment I let go, everything changed. Kyle found his way, and I found mine. I still live in the same house. The porch has been repaired, the locks replaced. But I left the crack in the wall behind the end table, where Kyle's fist once landed. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of what was survived, of what was rebuilt. Because love, real love, isn't just holding on. Sometimes, love is knowing when to let go, and trusting what might grow from the silence that follows.